Earlier this year, I published a video titled Understanding Utena. In that video, I only barely touched on the way that Utena challenges essentialistic gender, and the connection that it builds between gender and the heroic ideal of the prince. That challenge is perhaps the idea that defines the work, and omitting a more thorough discussion of it was probably a mistake on my part. It's a topic that's really fascinating, and I think it deserves a dedicated treatment. So, let's get to it. Catherine E. Bailey, in the article Prince Charming by Day, Superheroine by Night, presents Utena's challenge of gender like so. She writes, Utena emerges as a subject of multilateral narratological disruption. She subverts the narratives assigned to her gender, refuses heterosexual primacy, and tirelessly fights for what can only be called feminist ends. Yet, she can also be read as a hero according to queer theory, exploding gender binaries and rewriting the meanings of masculine and feminine terms, symbols, and ideas. The framework of fairy tale princes and princesses is an idealized and narrativized form of essentialistic gender. Utena disrupts that narrative while supporting the heroic ideals that it promotes. In a traditional fairy tale, Utena could never be a prince because the definition of prince requires that one be male. Nevertheless, Utena can and does embody the other traits that we associate with idealized princeliness. Through her actions, she decouples those traits, like bravery, power, nobility, and righteousness, from masculinity. She shows us then princeliness separate from maleness, and as Bailey puts it, the prince becomes then a body of ideas, connoting a heroic agency that is unfixed from gender. This unfixing from gender thing requires determined action. It doesn't just happen. Symbols or traits that initially appear phallic or masculine must be reinterpreted and reclaimed. By reappropriating these things, say swords for example, Utena can undermine the essentialness of the original gendered interpretation. Of course, this effort isn't without obstacles. Akio, the principal antagonist, attempts to reinforce essentialistic standards by impeding Utena's efforts. He makes her wear a dress, takes away her sword, and seduces her, all as part of a larger effort to re-socialize her as a princess. Now, Revolutionary Girl Utena isn't the first attempt to challenge gender's essentialism. In academia, notions of gender as essentialistic have been questioned for decades. For example, Candace West and Don Zimmerman's 1987 article, Doing Gender, laid the groundwork for a construction of gender as something that we do rather than something that we are. They draw distinctions between sex, sex category, and gender, and note that all of these can vary independently from one another, from person to person. Their conclusion is that essentialistic gender is steeped in a, quote, naive biological determinism, unquote, and that the main reason gender and sex are so closely aligned is because we constantly act as if they are. Judith Butler, in her writings, carries this torch further. For Butler, not only is gender something that we do, gender is performative in character. It exists only because we do it. Gender isn't indicative of anything at all, but rather it's a phenomenon that is constantly produced, maintained, and reiterated. In her words, because there is neither an essence that gender expresses or externalizes, nor an objective ideal to which gender aspires, because gender is not a fact, the various acts of gender creates the idea of gender, and without those acts, there would be no gender at all. Coming back to Utena, remember we want to frame her challenge of gender as an act of revolution. Butler says that in gender's very character as performative resides the possibility of contesting its reified status. A reformulation of gender is thus critical for any attempt to change the status quo. The common essentialistic understanding of gender has connotations of naturalness and authority that are difficult to dispel. Presenting and defending a credible alternative, like a performative account of gender, is the first step on the road to change, and fiction is very well suited for this purpose. Utena's actions are the evidence the show uses to support the reformulation of gender as something non-essential. Utena demands legitimacy despite falling outside normative understandings of masculinity and femininity. This is clear enough in her motivations. On a basic level, she just wants the freedom to express herself without essentialistic baggage. As Bailey puts it, Utena does not want to become a prince in the literal sense of the word. She does not want to relinquish her female body, she is not trying to pass as a man, and she resents it when people imply that she is somehow less of a woman simply because of her more performatively masculine behaviors. Instead of carving out a new category within the established system, a category for queer people, or for those who otherwise defy categorization, Utena suggests that essentialistic categorization itself is the problem. Rigid categories, backed up by a presupposition of naturalness, don't adequately reflect the way that people really are. Further, essentialistic classification facilitates hierarchy, exploitation, and in some cases, like at Otori Academy, abuse. A performative theory of gender is more egalitarian, more personal, and arguably more accurate. What makes this so incredible to me is that Utena argues against essentialism and incorporates queerness without focusing on the essence of queerness. The specifics of her sexuality are important to who she is, but they don't overshadow her actions. This makes Utena's message universalizable and internally consistent, considering that Utena's identity as a hero transcends her biological body and the nature of her attractions, honoring both without dwelling on either. As viewers, we can honor Utena's queerness by acknowledging her refusal to be categorized. Simply, we should accept her because she is embodied through her actions. I think a more thorough discussion of Utena's queerness, and the role of queerness in Utena, would be very productive, but I simply lack the social and personal context to say anything more beyond this point. So, to wrap things up, I feel that Utena uses the fairy tale as a representation of the child's worldview, a worldview that is destroyed during the transition to adulthood. In a similar way, Utena uses the fairy tale as a representation of gender. An essentialistic understanding of gender is a childish fiction, a fairy tale, that will never fully capture the complications and diversity of real lived experience. Instead, Utena advocates that essentialistic conceptions of gender should be done away with because they enable hierarchy and exploitation. We should then open ourselves up to a less restrictive approach to gender, one that accommodates queerness, fluidity, unconventional expression, and that allows people to strive for the ideals they believe in, rather than the ideals society tells them to believe in. To me, that seems pretty revolutionary. But these are just my thoughts. Let me give you my sincere thanks for watching. I didn't want to leave my discussion on Utena unfinished, and I appreciate everyone's patience. That's not to say that this reading is perfect. It's only one way of looking at Utena, and there's a lot of nuance that I've still failed to capture. I'm just happy to get my thoughts out there, and hopefully I can rekindle some discussion on a pretty phenomenal show. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. As always, I hope to see you next time. Take care.